Welcome to Nightlight. Step away from the mainstream and gather around as we enlighten the world and our realities and travel this cosmic journey we call life. Join us as we share with you and provide that beacon that can guide us all to a better way. Explore with us as we examine a metaphysical montage of spiritual insights, covering everything from the mundane to the magical, UFOs to unicorns, and everything in between. This is a time of awakening, of sharing and evolving, of spreading our wings and soaring on the cosmic breath of creation. Come and join with other light-minded spirits as we weave our lights together to seek understanding, enlightenment, and, with a little luck, some wisdom. This is Nightlight, a reminder that you are never alone.
Welcome to another Nightlight, or another episode of Nightlight Part 2. A mini tornado knocked our guests offline on Tuesday, so we rescheduled for a Friday the 13th in 2020. So what can go wrong? I'm hoping we get to do more than a 7-minute book review before the lizard people arrive or Godzilla and Mothra engage in a battle in front of my house. We had shows recently that were, I guess, travel logs to paranormal destinations. David Brody is going to give us another one in mid-January about Cam and Astarte's stops in the Ohio River Valley that show where Roman occupations were in Indiana and Kentucky. I think at the end of January, also Matt Adams is going to return, and he's going to talk about his trip he's on now, stopping a lot of Native American places. But tonight we're going to tour the Nile Valley, and we have a tour guide who is very familiar with leading groups through Egypt. Normandy Ellis is our guest. She is an author of the recently published Hieroglyphic Words of Power by Inner Traditions. She has also translated the Egyptian Book of the Dead. Aside from being an author and tour guide, Normandy is a spiritualist, minister, astrologer, and certified clairvoyant medium. You can learn more about Normandy by going to both of her websites, normandyellis.com, and Normandy is spelled NORMANDIELLIS, or you can go to twoladiestravelco.com. That's like twoladiestravelcompany.com. Okay, hi, Normandy. How are you?
Hey, I'm good, Mark. Thanks for having me.
Yes. How's your neighborhood after the microburst or really strong cold front came through on Tuesday? You doing okay?
Yes. I had to take a walk and kick some branches out of the way, but yeah, it's not too bad. They come through every now and then. You know, we're in the Midwest, so that's what it does.
Okay. Well, things like that happen. So, you know,
Thanks
maybe
for
Friday
having me
the
back
13th.
on.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Maybe Friday the 13th happened on what Tuesday the 10th. And hopefully we'll have smooth sailing through the next 3 hours and 55 minutes. But
That's right.
okay. So, and before we get into your extensive writings about ancient Egypt, we should just start off with some of the basics. Like, how did you become so captivated by the ancient Egyptian culture?
Well, that is a very interesting story. I had a friend who I grew up in the same neighborhood with him, and I hadn't seen him in many years. He went to Vietnam, and before he went to Vietnam, the Rosicrucians got hold of him because he was going to be a medic, and they taught him how to assist souls in transition. So I met him after he came back from Vietnam, and we were talking about the Rosicrucians and about mysticism and so on. And he said to me, "Oh, you need to read the Book of the Dead, the Egyptian Book of the Dead." And I said, "Oh, sounds fascinating." He goes, "No, you really need to read it. There's a book over there on the shelf in that bookstore. You should go buy it." I was like, "Well, I'll go look at that later." "No," he said. He walked me across the street, and we bought it. So after that, then he came over to my house that evening and said he had to leave and go down the river for his work, and he had to leave his apartment. So he left all of his Rosicrucian teachings with me, which, he said, don't show them around, but I guess it's okay if you read them. I said, okay. So he left, and I figured he'd come back for them, but I went traveling. And when I got back traveling, I was going to move out west, and he still hadn't come back for his books. So I took the books with me because he told me not to just give them to anybody. So I took his books with me. And about a year later, I went home and discovered that my friend had died. And that was why I never gave the books back to him. He never called me for them because he had passed in the spirit. And I tell you, that Book of the Dead and all those Rosicrucian teachings acquired this power. It was like I would get near the books and feel a zap. So I was taking a class in my master's degree in English literature in a translation workshop. And we had to have two languages. I worked in Spanish for a while, and I didn't have a second language. And so the teacher said, well, what fascinates you? Maybe we can work with that. And I said, hieroglyphs. And he said, okay, get some good grammar dictionaries and some various translations and start working with it. Well, I did. And the class ended, and I just kept working with it. And I worked on that same text. I translated it 3 times from Wallace Budge's Book of the Dead. I used the hieroglyphs in there 3 times, front to back. About 10 years it took me to go through it. And my husband at the time wanted me to throw it away because it was obsessing me, he said. And so we got in a big fight, and I was going to throw the books in the trash. And I'll say my husband at the time, because this kind of solidified that it wasn't the right relationship. But anyway, I was driving up the road with these books in the back seat, and I was going to throw them in the dumpster. And I look in the rearview mirror, and I see my friend sitting in the back seat next to the books. I see his spirit, and I thought, oh, that's just me, having a moment, because we had this fight. And so I just kept driving. And about that time, Robert, my friend, reaches out and puts his hand on my shoulder, his spirit hand. And it was like I'd stuck my finger in a light socket. It just shook me from one end to the other, almost ran the car off the road. And finally, I stop and I look in the rearview mirror and he's still there. And I said, Robert, don't you ever do that again. You scared the hell out of me. And when I acknowledged him, he was gone. So I got out of the car. I took the tire out of the wheel well, and I put all the books I'd been working on in there, and then covered it back up so that my husband would think I'd thrown it away, like I said. And I kept working on those texts for another couple of months until a gentleman who had been in my class in the translation workshop, 10 years before, wrote to me and said, you would happen to have a copy of that. I've started a publishing company. So that became Awakening Osiris. And that's how it started.
Okay. Interesting story.
It's a long story, but all true.
No, it's fun. And that story is a nice segue into kind of my first question around the book. In the foreword, your friend Nikki Scully writes it, you had the sight from birth. What that does tie in with what you just said, as well as showing that you do bring in another view of the hieroglyphs that most of us, we don't understand the artwork's interesting, but there is more to the meaning, and you expound upon that throughout the book. Can you explain what Nikki meant by the sight?
Yeah, that your intro goes in two different directions, and I want to approach both of them. I think what Nikki meant is that I was a reluctant clairvoyant. I had always been a reluctant clairvoyant. Nikki taught a workshop one time, and she wanted me to co-teach it with her, becoming an oracle. And I said, no, I can't. I don't know how to do that. And, I literally ran away. It's like, no, I'm not teaching it. And as it turned out, she wrote a book on becoming an oracle. She wrote it with someone else. But I ended up going to where I live now, to Camp Chesterfield, and I began studying to be a medium, because it had always been in my family that there was someone with sight. My great aunt, Arzelia, had studied at Camp Chesterfield, and that's what led me to come up here to study, how to be a medium. I just wanted to be I thought it was like I wanted to be a better writer, but if I could see, then I thought that would improve it, but I've always seen spirit ever since I was a kid, mostly family, but not necessarily the family of other people, in the way that a medium does. And I had a great-grandfather who was a medium, and my mother had mediumistic qualities, though she didn't acknowledge them either. It was not something that you said you wanted to do when you grew up, So the other thing, I think, is that once I came to Camp Chesterfield and I learned how to become a medium and how to trust the information that Spirit was giving me and bringing to me, I learned to work more with Spirit. It always had occurred that while I was writing, something that you would think of as being synchronistic, like I would write short stories and I thought I was making things up, and I wasn't. They were actually real. And I would find out later and think, oh, my God, did I really write that? How could I have known that? So there was a little bit of spooky factor in it. Well, anyway, after I learned to be a medium, I began to trust the vision I was getting. So this book that we're talking about, Hieroglyphic Words of Power, I've been fascinated with hieroglyphs for 30 years, but I didn't know how to write a book about them. So I sat down and began to work with my spirit guides and said, okay, you tell me what you want me to write. You tell me how you want me to say it. And so for about the process of two years, I guess, I would sit down every morning with my guides with a composition notebook. And at 8 o'clock exactly, I would start writing. And I would close my eyes and I would just write. I didn't know what I was writing. I would just write. And at 8:30, the pen would fall out of my hand and I was done for the day. Be in the middle of a sentence, but I was done for the day because that's how much time my guide said I could do it. So finally, my guide came in one day and said to me, I'm going to pass you off to another guide, and you can work with this particular guide longer. So that's what happened, how the book got going. But, I mean, if I missed my 8 o'clock appointment, I'd be lying in bed, and I would feel a slap on my face to wake me up, like, you go down there and start work. Yeah, it's like, okay.
Okay.
Yeah, so the whole book is like almost channeled, you could think of.
Okay. Well, you did preface your answer. You're working in spirit, and in the early stages of this book, you do draw our attention to, when you're just looking at the hieroglyphs, the ancient Egyptians placed far greater personal or cultural meaning, and like it said, spirit. Like there was something far more important behind the symbols than how, if we're just looking at the English letter A today. It's like, okay,
right.
It's a triangle with a horizontal line, and that's it. There's not a whole lot more behind it. But in ancient Egypt, there was something far more greater than just a symbol. Can you explain a little bit more about that, and as just kind of set the stage as we just kind of get our first lesson in a foreign language?
Okay. First of all, that very angular A, if you turn it upside down with its point on the ground toward the bottom, you actually have a cow with its cow horns straight up. And then that's actually where an A started. It was turned on its side over the cultures that it went through, from Phoenician and Sumerian and Greek and so on. But it actually, started out as a cow. So a lot of what...
I did not know that.
I didn't know that until... encyclopedia salesman came to my house when I was a kid, and I was so excited with the encyclopedia that that was something that I learned in it, all kinds of stuff like that. So when you're looking at Egyptian words, first of all, you have words or letters of the alphabet that are simply sounds, like a p or a b or a t. Okay, and so they have to have a little sign, So there are bilaterals that combine two. They're one sign, but they combine two sounds, like WH or TH, like wa or th or bruh or something like that.
ST street.
Right. Right. Then there's 3, which are called trilaterals, and that's where you have 3 sounds, like an ankh. You just draw the ankh itself, but it indicates 3 sounds. So when you write Tutankhamun, when you're writing the ankh, you're just writing the ankh sign. And it could be life, and it could be, it could mean a likeness of, or, it has multiple meanings depending upon what other non-sound hieroglyphs are around it, So not all hieroglyphs have sounds. Some of them are just, I guess we would say, connotations, Sometimes the ankh is written, and what it actually indicates is a sandal strap, but it's the same shape and sign, Yeah. So, if you are trying to figure out how to pronounce the Kemetic language, that's what we call the hieroglyphs in the Egyptian language. If you're trying to figure out how to pronounce it exactly, the closest we can get is looking at how it sounds in the Coptic language, Coptic Christian, because that derived from Egypt. But for the most part, they didn't write with vowels, just like the Hebrews did. The Jews didn't write with vowels. The Hebrew language does not have vowels in it. And they have little vowels that are above the consonants. They were implied later, but originally they weren't there, like the Egyptian. And the reason that the vowels aren't there is that the breath is sacred. And so if you want to preserve a language which has the breath of God in it, you don't put the vowel sounds in there. And so that was a way of preserving the magic and the power in the hieroglyphs, was not writing the vowels in there.
Okay. So.
Okay. So. Go ahead.
Yeah. I was just gonna say. So, like, those comments in mind, you start off by using an example of Heka.
Right.
That's, and kind of that your description of that word sets the tone for the rest of the book. Okay, so let's go start there with Heka.
Yeah, what the Heka have we got to lose? Okay, so that word is written with only 2 phonetic hieroglyphs, an H sound and a Ka, a bilateral, a Ka sound. Heka. And so we're putting the E sound in it because that's just pronounceable, Okay, so the H sound is a piece of twine or string that is in a wick, rolled up into a wick, and it's got like 3 loops on it. And that's a very strong H sound. There's actually 3 H sounds in the Egyptian language. There's like a real soft, breathy H, like you would say house, There's a KH sound that's very Egyptian, sounding like, it's like that. But then the H sound that's sharp, like you say the word hot, and it's very vocal and breathy. Ha, that's the H that's part of Heka. And so you can look at that and think about, okay, so this word, all language, if you're a poet, you're thinking about how language is being used anyway. And anytime you're using a word that has that kind of strong sound in it, you know that it has a strong intention behind the language. So the next word is Ka, K-H, and it's the image of 2 arms that are upraised, in prayer. They are kind of in the shape of cow horns, where it's like if you were praying and you opened your hands out, you have your elbows at shoulder height and your arms are, at a right angle. That you've got both arms like that. That really opens up your chest. And you can feel that stretch across your chest and across your heart. And that word, ka, means spirit. And so you're opening yourself to the light. You are opening yourself to spirit to work through you, which is what you would be doing if you were working in a magical, mystical tradition like the ancient Egyptian language. You're asking spirit to come in and work with you, okay? And so that ka is the animating principle of the universe. It's one of the 9 spiritual bodies of the ancient Egyptians. So Heka, that is just the sound of those words, but the images inside those glyphs also indicate that there's a strong intention, a fire, a light, a flame on that H wick sound, ka, with the spirit that is opened up. Okay, and then the next thing that you get are hieroglyphs that do not have any sound attached to them, but they give a flavor to Heka. Okay, and what that is a rolled up scroll tied with string. And that's the sign for an incantation, a prayer, and anything that a scribe has written. And then there's 3 little seeds that often accompany it. That means multiples. So that, Heka is magic that can be used in multiple ways. And when they defined it, the ancient Egyptians defined it as words of power. So hieroglyphic words of power. They defined Heka as words of power. A lot of people define it as magic, and they say it was the nuclear energy of the ancient world. Because if you could think something and you could speak it and you could put the emphasis and your will behind it, you could manifest it. And so that's why Heka was so powerful.
Okay. Interesting. And at the start of each segment of the symbol like Heka, you have a photo of the it's like upturned hands. It's like a squared U appearance. Mm-hmm. You also discuss how the ancient Egyptians included many birds. There's like, or is it?
Yeah, they called it the language of birds.
Yes, it's like 60 different birds are used. For page 40, you get the AKH.
Ak.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and maybe just do a quick review of the numerous use of birds. I thought that was really captivating.
Okay. Really an interesting word. I mean, because they have a lot of onomatopoeia words in their language, and so ak is it's the sound a bird makes. That particular fishing bird, ak, ak, ak. When it's flying over the land, that it says its name. And a lot of the animals that they have in there, the animals will say their names. But the birds themselves are really very, very interesting because I think in part it's because the Egyptian landscape is without a lot of hiding places for the birds, and so you see them a lot on the banks. They're often in the sky. I know when I am on the Nile itself, and I'm really, floating down the Nile and seeing these birds early in the morning, and I'm looking at this tree one time, and I thought, that tree has the most beautiful white blossoms, and then all of a sudden, I hear these wings, and it's these birds that have been resting in the tree overnight. It's just amazing. The birds are one of the most amazing spirit-filled animals that you can see in Egypt. A lot of the birds in the Bible, that idea comes from the Egyptian landscape as well. So Thoth, the god Thoth, is a bird. The god of wisdom, he's related to the Ankh. There's a god named
he's a heron.
Geb. He's a heron. Yes. The god Geb is a goose, so that's father goose as opposed to mother goose. There is, let's see, I'm trying to think. Horus the hawk. Yeah, Horus the hawk. There's the phoenix, which is called a benben, so that's another kind of bird. The ba, which is the soul, it's a human-headed hawk. There's a lot of different birds. Isis turns into a kite, which is a small falcon. There's Mut, the goddess, who is a vulture, and then there's Nekbet, who is a vulture goddess. They were the sign of the mother. A lot of times you will see vultures written at the back of, like, Cleopatra's name, and it means that she's a mother. She's the mother of, a particular child. And so that's because she lays an egg, and Mut, they wore that, crown of the vulture goddess on their head. So lots of birds. Lots of different birds.
Yeah, Normandy, like I was saying at the start of the show, you thoroughly go through, like A to Z of all the characters in the Egyptian language, and start off each section with a photo of each character. How are you? Are those your photos found on the temples? If you look at your website, there's all the photos you took. All the temples are just covered with all of these
all the hieroglyphs.
Hieroglyphs,
right.
Yeah. Did you just go?
I didn't take the photos. Those photos were by a woman named Aset Rohn, Ausettrohn, and she's a professional photographer. And we would go through the temples. And I tell you how we found the pictures is that people would come to me and say, Normandy, look at this. What does that mean? And so after a while, I got used to knowing where particular hieroglyphs could be found in which temples. And so as we were going through on one of our trips, I would pull a set aside and I would say, here, take this photo here, take this photo here, take this photo here, so that we could get pictures of all of them for the book. Now, a couple of them were broken. That is one of the things that you notice when you go to Egypt is that a lot of the temple walls, they're very fragile. You could put your hand on a bas-relief hieroglyph, the ones that stick out, and take your hand away, and the glyph would be gone. It would just have crumbled. I can't tell you how many times I have to tell people, don't touch the walls. Put your backpack on the front of your chest, not on your back, because I don't want you rubbing up against the hieroglyphs. But because they're really fragile. So anyway, yeah, I had Offset go around and take the pictures of the hieroglyphs, and then a few of them we had to Photoshop. But to tell you the truth, I wasn't going to include hieroglyphs pictures at first, although she did a beautiful job when I asked her to do it. I always believed that, yes, she did. I always believed that it was better to write the glyph yourself. So when I was translating that book of Wallace Budge's, The Book of the Dead, I wrote everything by hand in a notebook. I wrote every single glyph by hand in the notebook. And then I would go back, and on the opposite page, I would begin my translation work. And I really felt that, it's kind of also like when I was talking about working with my spirit guides and I work in a composition notebook. There's something that happens when you put your hand to the material that's different than when you just type it or when you take a photograph of it. It's like the connection between your hand and your brain and all those nerves that go from your brain down your arm to your fingers, they get infused with that energy. And I think that it's very strong, and that what comes out is much, to me, it is much more powerful. So I if you were a magician and you were going to write a spell, you would do it by hand. You wouldn't write your spell, type it out on a piece of paper and put it under a candle. You would want to write it by hand. You would want to inscribe your candle, with a stylus, and write a hieroglyph on your candle with the stylus.
Okay, and does you? Yeah, and right as you were discussing your preferred way of actually writing something, I'm the same way. I just glanced down. So made a note to myself. You on page 104, you talk about Heka embodies the idea that thoughts are things.
Right.
You are okay. Just you're making the physical mind connection with writing.
Yeah, I think that a lot of people don't realize how connected their thoughts are to the reality that they're living. And I believe that was one of the things that was so powerful about the ancient Egyptians, is that they made that connection. Not everyone could write, but everyone understood that they were living inside the body of the divine, that the natural world was the body of God. And so they understood that to begin with. When you start trying to write as an abstraction, I think that's what disconnects us from the world, like the Roman letters A, B, C, D, disconnect us from the vulture that is the ancient Egyptian A, or the leg that is the ancient Egyptian B. They're not physicalized anymore, and I think that's That's a great loss because we're not connected. Our thoughts aren't connected to the things of our life anymore. And thoughts are things. Thoughts make the reality. That's, our body is 99% air. Really, it's just molecules floating around.
Mm-hmm.
And we think we're real. But, the reality of it is that it's the thought that's holding it all together. It's the perception that's making it real.
Yeah, there's I'll come back to that. There's I think I started to jump ahead of myself a little and say that and give you another talk about another example, and then we'll start tying a couple things together. But
okay.
With the dog star Sirius, there's so much that was emphasized about the Nile flooding. The flooding started the new year, and that was in like springtime when the snows of Kilimanjaro are starting to melt.
Yeah, summer. Summer.
Okay, so summer. So, what about? We're talking what 1,500, 2,000 or more BC. About the same time in the Orkney Islands, you have the Celtic peoples starting the new year on February 1st, observing it from the stones of Stennes. So I thought that that was just an interesting way, a difference between the two different cultures, and you do go into the flooding a lot in your book. I really liked those numerous sections.
Yeah, it's very important, the flooding of the Nile, in a culture that only gets 2 inches of rain a year. So that melting of the snow caps at Kilimanjaro, which is one tributary of the Nile, combines with the monsoons in Ethiopia, which are occurring about the same time, and these two tributaries of the Nile, the White and the Blue Nile, join together at Khartoum, and they only do it once a year, and they rush through the land, and they burble over the rocks, and they push the effluvia that's been built up for the past year out of the country and push it out, clean it out, all the way down to the Nile Delta. And the water, it's got all this black, rich earth soil that it's pushing down the river. And as the water spreads over the land, it's depositing this black earth, that agricultural land, that you see images of Osiris with his very dark face, and that's the image of fertility, the image of fecundity and possibility. It's all that black, rich soil that is part of that culture. And Set, his brother, is red-faced, and he's red like the desert, like the sandstone in the desert. And so it's interesting to me where you have these two brothers who are side by side. You can stand in Egypt with 1 foot in the dark soil and 1 foot in the red soil. That is how strictly divided, where it stops, where the flood stops, it stops being fertile. And it's really very interesting. So you have a brother who's a hunter-gatherer, who lives in the desert and hunts game, and another brother who's an agriculturalist. And so that's really how two communities argued with each other over who had the responsibility of the land. Were the hunters going to win or the agriculturalists? I mean, same thing happened out west, the cattlemen and the wheat farmers. It's kind of the same story. Yeah.
The new NU.
Yes, NU
is the symbol for
the flood.
The flooding.
Right, new. Yeah.
Okay.
That's right.
Putting things together, and when you were talking about a little bit ago about using one's mind,
mm-hmm.
you do include on page 105, the Master Jesus told his disciples in John 14, chapter 14, verse 12, all these things I do, you can do also, and even greater than these.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. That's we can talk about some other examples, but you're starting to also introduce into your book many of these concepts that been covering somewhat in depth for just to get started, but the same concepts are reappearing about 2,000 years later in the New Testament, and like the John passage I just read. Right. I thought that was interesting how you're making these correlations.
It is interesting because I have spent a long time looking at the universality of Eastern and Western traditions, and I just spent 2 years looking at what connects them across the Silk Road, with Zoroastrianism, and it's fascinating to me that what we think of as a pagan religion was actually hidden and written in scripts that were probably beginning to be written some years before the Gospels were written, but they were hidden in these texts. The Gospels weren't written until around 50 years after after the turn of the first century. So Christ had been dead maybe 40 years or so when some of the Gospels were being written. But these other texts, Nag Hammadi texts and Gnostic Gospels and so on, were being written and sealed into caves in Egypt for a long time. Before that whole, culture around Alexandria was full of philosophers and religion of all stripes. So, I think that there's a lot of crossover. You take Psalm 104 and the hymn to Aten, and you put them side by side, and they are almost exact copies of each other. You know, go figure, right?
Right there, with Psalm 104. We have, sticking with the Old Testament, like you just mentioned. There's the First Kings 18 verses 10 through 12, and samples from John and Acts where you're talking about some teleportation that the ancient Egyptians were interested in, and we find the same thing. That might be a good explanation for Jesus walking across the lake.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know how you explain that.
Yeah, well, it's not just a fable, is it? You know, I actually teach a class in called Spiritualism in the New Testament. They've also got spiritualism in the Old Testament, but a whole list of things. Like if you look in 1 Corinthians verses 1 through 12, it gives you an entire list of all of the spiritual talents. I mean, what, like speaking in tongues and interpreting tongues and healing and all kinds of things, all these things. And that these things that Jesus did, we could do them as well. It's a matter of learning that Spirit moves us to do these things. And having become a medium, I've seen some amazing things happen in a room full of mediums where things will materialize. That's a whole different subject. But yeah, it happens. It happens.
Yeah. As spent 10 days or so reading your book. There were a number of these examples we just read, and there's many other ones. Mainly, quite a few from the New Testament, where you are drawing from your observations in Egypt and making some correlations, like this same idea from Egypt is also had an impact on Jesus's philosophy. What some of the other New Testament writers were thinking. It's just interesting to see ancient Egypt's legacy carrying on into the New Testament. 1,500 years later, and even overshadowed maybe some of the Greek thought. A little bit more contemporary, maybe just a little earlier, but it's somewhat contemporary Greek thought. really says something about how much of an impact the Egyptian pharaohs and priests, philosophers had throughout the Holy Land for 2-3 millennia.
Right. And I think that, we're talking about a culture that lasted 3,000 years that we know of, written history, but probably, 2,000 years before that, they were building up to it. That's a much longer culture and civilization than any civilization that we can even think of, and it's interesting to me when you read texts by the ancient Egyptians, even in the Old Kingdom, like at the end of the 6th dynasty or the 7th dynasty, and they're looking back at the building of the pyramids, and the scribes are saying, we don't remember how they did that. Like, what? You don't remember how they did that? Because it was like this brilliance that came in there, and then it vanished, And then more than that, we had equality in the Old Kingdom, where there were women healers and physicians and a lot of high priestesses, which disappears in the New Kingdom. So the equality vanishes. And I hate to say it, but, you can look at what's going on in the world now. We're not getting smarter if we forget where we came from, right? That's what it comes down to.
That's and well, okay. That I just looked down my notes, and there is you did discuss Gandhi's 7 principles of will.
Oh yeah.
As well, he wasn't Egyptian, but he's not forgetting.
He's not forgetting
his history.
Mm-hmm. That's right. And what's true in one culture can be true in another culture.
Right. And yeah. Well, with some of these examples from the New Testament, it just really seems like when Joseph and Mary took Jesus to Egypt, it just wasn't few-day walk and
right.
Hide out for a week and until things blew over with Herod. They were there for a lengthy stay.
Yeah.
And was it in Matthew? It says they were there for till the end of Herod's reign, death. It was a considerable period of time. When you start looking at all the information you present, with the symbols, shows up, like this New Testament passage. It just really.
Tell you something about that because you're making me remember when I was in Cairo with an Egyptian guide, and we were walking through the Coptic churches, the Christian churches, and they're next door to Jewish synagogues, which are right around the corner from the Muslim mosques. And it's like all three cultures are so closely interwoven. And the guide said to me, she said, you know, when you think about it, Jesus was an Egyptian. She said his first taste of food other than his mother's milk was Egyptian food. He took his first steps on Egyptian soil, you know, and I thought, yeah, that's right. You know, he lived there, just like you said, a very long time. And probably those memories and that, you know, that wisdom that he had when he walked into the synagogue and began teaching the teachers, you know, it's very interesting to me that the Egyptian and the Jewish and the Christian all intertwine, you know.
Well, and that's one of, you know, the aspects of your book that, you know, I took away is, you know, how much of you know, the Egyptian culture it impacted Jesus's family. Were they, you know, were there for a long time? You know, like you said, you probably learned to walk there. You know, the first foods he ate were Egyptian dishes, but you know, almost any family's going to talk about living in a major metropolis, and you know, probably just imagine, you know, after you know, they came home from temple, you know, say Jesus is like 9, and you know, she'd ask him, you know, hey, you remember, you know, the rabbi was talking about, you know, this, you know, Moses doing this and in Egypt, and you can probably hear, you know, imagine Mary asking, you know, Jesus, do you remember, you know, when we went out to see the Sphinx?
Right.
Oh, it seems like almost any family, you know, if you were living in a naval base, Air Force base, you know, probably, you know, families probably ask their kids that, you know, remember, you know, when you know, we lived in Italy or some place like that.
Right.
Right. It's, you know, you just really put things into perspective.
I really think the world is such an interesting place. You know, there's so many things that we are still discovering about ourselves. And to think that we're discovering, you know, I was thinking about those in Saqqara. Did you see the recent Netflix show on the tombs in Saqqara that they have found?
No, I missed that. I'm familiar with the Saqqara pyramid, but I did not see the movie you're referencing.
Okay, just that culture, Saqqara, which is just down the road from Giza, just down the road from the synagogue that became a church where Mary and Joseph and Jesus hid. There's actually a well that they drew their water from in that particular church. And so this place, Saqqara, is just down the road from there. And it has had burial grounds. It's like the necropolis from the 3rd dynasty all the way up to the Ptolemaic era, you know, to when Jesus was walking the earth, you know. And so this place has had all of this sacred knowledge there for so many years. And, you know, it's interesting to me that there are ancient there are ancient Egyptian wisdom keepers, or I would say modern Egyptian wisdom keepers of the ancient knowledge that still live in these communities, and we can still meet them. You know, I met a man named Hakim, and he knew things that astounded me, you know, very magical and wonderful things. And so it's not surprising that the culture would have kept these traditions, and that a man like Jesus would have been, or a child like Jesus would have been interested in that, you know?
And when these temples were in their heyday, maybe let's say when Moses is there, possibly when the reign of the Ptolemies, or when Joseph and Mary and Jesus were there. They may have seen some of the remnants of the paints on the exterior of these temples, and talk about the hieroglyphs are also painted. So it would have been very striking architectural features to just to see them now, but when they're covered in paints, I'm sure it would have been even more striking. Can you tell us a little bit about the colors that were used on the buildings?
Sure. They were made of, by and large, they were made of crushed up, the paint was crushed up gemstones. So like crushed up turquoise, crushed up carnelian, crushed up lapis lazuli, crushed up jimson, and of course gold that was on some of the pillars and the faces of the buildings. Quite beautiful. And they are discovering, even now, they are finding a way to, they were smoke damaged is what happened after the sands had drifted into the old temples, and then people began to stay inside the temple and build fires and keep warm, in the wintertime, and the smoke damaged the ceilings. And so everyone just thought that everything, the temples had turned black, and that's all that there was. Well, these folks in the last decade or so have figured out how to clean the smoke off those and the ceilings without damaging the paint. And when they did that, they look exactly as if they had been painted yesterday, because they were painted with gemstones and the colors never faded. So it's an amazing to see even now. Even now, it's amazing to see.
I'm sure it is. And there were actually colorful place. We were talking about the healers and
right
priests.
And they use color for healing.
Yeah, so much of the culture radiated across the Mediterranean. Obviously, it leaves has left a lasting impact for 5,000 years, and one of the symbols that um, is it's still used today. It is the lotus symbol.
Yes.
Yeah, can
Right.
you tell us a little bit about the lotus,
Well,
the ubiquitous lotus?
Yes, it has a wonderful mythology behind it. The lotus is a symbol. There's a god whose name is Nefertum, who wears upon his head a lotus flower. And it is a blue lotus flower. And Nefertum, his name means the perfected one or the complete being. And he is a human figure. He's not like a jackal or a hawk. He's a young man who is the child of the lion goddess Sekhmet and the god Ptah, who is like Osiris. He's mummified. Or he's wrapped up like a mummy, but he's one of the creators of the world, and he's the one who spoke the world into being. And his name is Ptah, and his consort was Sekhmet, the lioness. Now their child wears the lotus on his head because he's the combination of how it's been said is the masculine feminine and the feminine masculine. So it's a perfected one because he has all of the qualities. But also Ptah is a god of language and speech, and Sekhmet is a goddess of willpower. And so when you combine your willpower and your speech together, you can create from the heart, okay, which is what Nefertum is. He's an image of, I guess you would call like a magical being who creates from the heart through his will and through his mind. And, so Nefer means beautiful, and Tem means completion, the beautiful completion. So when a lotus comes up on the surface in the daylight as the sun is coming up, and the lotus rises and floats on top of the water and opens itself up, when the sun sets, it closes up and sinks down beneath the waters at night, so that it is always a flower that responds to the light, okay? So that is another quality of the lotus. The other thing is that it is, of course we heard about the lotus eaters, in Odysseus. And so that's the lotus they're speaking of because it had kind of soporific qualities or sometimes hypnagogic qualities to it. It could put you in a trance if you ate the lotus. And so probably you see all the beautiful people at the banquets with the lotus on top of their heads, and I'm sure they were probably slightly intoxicated and having a great time. It was a plant of ease and goodness, and there wasn't, where the lotus was, there was not a lot of sorrow. So, yeah.
Okay. And if people have enjoyed the variety of topics we've discussed over the last 75 minutes, how can they get a hold of you about your trips? Hopefully all this travel stuff and the virus is going to be over real soon, so we can get back to having a normal life and we get out and travel again.
Well, yeah. When it all started, I was in Egypt in March, and I was supposed to have 2 trips back to back, and we only made one of them. So we are planning on going back in September of 2021. Feel that that's safe enough in the future that people will be able to get vaccines and travel. I already see people traveling to Egypt. We were traveling even then very carefully. You know, you were taking your wipes with you, and every time we went out, you know, we would wipe down the seats where we were sitting at the restaurants. You know, we had our masks on, and when we got back to the boat, we would wipe down everything. So we were very cautious, and probably that's going to continue for a while, but I don't think that should stop anyone from traveling. And so if they want to get in touch with me, they can go 2 different places. My website, which is NormandyEllis.com, and then TwoLadiesTravelCo.com. And that is the company I have with my friend Osset Roan, who is the photographer. And we have right now maybe 5 more spaces available for people to go in September. We will also be going in March and November of next year. And so I'll try to do 2 a year, spring and fall. It's about a 2-week tour. We start in Cairo between the paws of the Sphinx at dawn. I love to start that way. It just really gets you in the mood for being in Egypt. And then we'll go to Saqqara and see what's there. We'll probably spend all day there. We'll fly up to Aswan. Usually, if we start in Aswan, we get on the boat. We go to see the Temple of Isis at Philae, and then we'll sail down from Elephantine to Luxor, stopping at various temples along the way. We spend about 5 to 6 days on the water. And then it's really nice. It's a pretty nice trip. And then we go back to Cairo and go into town so you can see what the town looks like. We'll go into the Great Pyramid at night. We have private visits at the Temple of Isis between the paws of the Sphinx and inside the Great Pyramid. So that's usually what we do. And everywhere else, you know, we try to time it so there's not a lot of company there so that we can spend as much time as we want. Valley of the Kings and so on.
Okay, you do you do cover in your book. This would kind of corresponds with your trip down the Nile, but you also do talk about to El Kaif, the city of vulture goddess.
Oh yes. Yes.
What's the story there?
El Kab. Yeah.
Kab.
That is off. El Kab. Yeah, that's off the beaten path. That is not on the Nile, so you have to get in a jeep and travel across the wadis and into the eastern desert. Is it the eastern desert, I think? Yeah, it's the eastern desert. And there's an old dried up riverbed. Apparently there was water in it, pre-dynastically. And there are these big petroglyphs on the rock walls that are images of Thoth and the vulture goddess and the cow goddess and the boats floating down the river, which is now a dry bed of stone and sand. it's quite an amazing thing to see, to see these big petroglyphs that mark the site. It's almost like you can imagine an ancient billboard saying, "Stop here," have the goddess bless your cattle and your sheep and all of that. Get in line. It's really a sweet little place, and there's an old temple there that has a wall. The wall is all that remains around it, and one stone structure in the middle. But it's quite a big plaza. Very interesting.
Okay, and at one point it used to be tropical, but like you said, it's in the eastern
Savannah,
deserts.
Yeah.
The microclimate has greatly changed.
Yeah, the Savannah used to be. Libya used to be a savanna, and probably around 20,000 BC. This is before what we would think of as Egyptian culture, but there were whales that were swimming around in the eastern desert, and when it all dried up, they got stuck there. And so you can go to this place called the Valley of the Whales. It's probably near Libya. I guess you can't go to it right now. I would love to go, but it's so close to the Libyan border, they don't let you go there anymore. But there are whale bones there. And what's interesting about them is that some of the older ones, look like the whales have vestigial feet. It's not just flippers. They almost look like feet, with ankle hinges, sort of. Very interesting.
Wow. That sounds really fascinating. And in your book, you also talk about the importance of Heliopolis, and it's on. It seems like it's on your, one of your stops for your trip. What is at Heliopolis?
Well, Heliopolis is actually Cairo now. It was the old city of Heliopolis, the city of the light. The origin of Ra, and that is Giza. Then became the necropolis of Heliopolis. All the cities are on the eastern side, and all the necropolis or graveyards are on the western side. So that's kind of how that looks. There's not a whole lot left of Heliopolis anymore. We went to Hermopolis, and that was interesting. That's it's not exactly in Middle Egypt, but it's a little further south than Giza, and it's near. There's another place called Beni Hassan. They're places that are not often gone to on the normal itinerary. They're kind of, they're kind of more rural. You can get there by train or you get there by bus, but they don't have any airports there. Well, when you go to Hermopolis, this was the city that was dedicated to Thoth and to all of the high priests and scribes who studied the Emerald Tablets. Pythagoras studied there. He studied mathematics there.
Wow.
Pythagoras floated around Egypt for years and years and years trying to get someone to teach him something. And finally, he went to become an initiate at Hermopolis. And that's where, he learned everything that he knew about mathematics and astronomy and alchemy and, a lot of the sciences he learned there. as well as the hieroglyphs and the language. And then he went back to Samoa in Greece and started his school, and thus we have the theorem of Pythagoras, that we all have to learn in high school.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I think, he's a prominent name in out of prehistory, and
Uh-huh.
yeah, I think Barbara and I kind of missed those days in high school since we, Nightlight doesn't do math, but except for when she talks about she's going to double my salary. I know what the final answer is, but
well, I could get you hooked up with a guy who does sacred geometry. Maybe you'd like it.
Yeah, that might be a little bit more my style. But so some of these other stops is the Abydos Temple. Is that the one that has the long flight of steps up to it, and there are a number of archways cut into the hillside?
Yes. It has a long flight of steps up to it. Yes, it does, and it has, I think, gosh, now I'm trying to remember the number. I think 7 different shrines. Like there's a shrine to Ptah, there's a shrine to Isis, one to Osiris, one to Horus, et cetera, et cetera. So one to Sekhmet. So there are all these different shrines. That is one of the temples that has multiple shrines, and it's where the old temple of Osiris is, the original temple of Osiris, the one that was supposedly built pre-dynastically. And if you go around back, you can see where there is the flower of life, that beautiful image of the flower of life that has been pressed into one of the pillars. What's amazing about it is it's not engraved, it is not painted, it is not tattooed, but somehow it's almost like it's laser imposed upon the stones themselves. It's very interesting. And behind that temple, there are 7 boats. There's a lot of prehistoric burial grounds where the kings are buried with their sailing vessels. And this is about 7 miles away from the river at this point. But there they are out in the middle of the desert, and they're pre-dynastic. So you're thinking, well, the river must have gone there too at some point, and then it dried up and to its current channel. But it's quite interesting place to be. But it has the king's list.
In those ships are visible?
Well, they were buried, like they buried the ship to take them with them. But they were seagoing vessels because you can tell by the oar marks on the wood itself that they were used at one time and that they were great big ships. They were seagoing. They were not just paddle boats up and down the Nile.
Wow. Okay, that's it. That I'm fascinated by that naval engineering.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the prehistoric people knew what they were doing.
Yeah.
And speaking of prehistoric advanced cultures, did you agree with a lot of just say John Anthony West's theories that these were some ancient people who really had their act together, and what he would say today, like the quack academics, really can't understand.
He got his word.
Yeah,
the quack academics.
Yeah, I pay close attention to what he said. When I had a chance to meet with him and talk with him later, but he just really disgusted with the way people today minimalize these astounding achievements that the ancient Egyptians were responsible for.
You're right. And, I really loved John West. I was so sorry that he passed into spirit. It felt like too early to me. I know he was older, but I was a great admirer of John West and loved to go to Egypt when he was in Egypt. Would run into him. We'd cross paths often at the Temple of Isis, and we'd sit there and drink coffee and pet the cats and feed them ho-hos and talk about the quackademics, So, yeah, I definitely am a big fan of John West's work. His book, Traveler's Key to Ancient Egypt, I bought 2 copies of it, and one copy I broke the spine on, and I would take the pages of the book out and stick them in my back jeans pocket so that I would have, if somebody asked me a question I didn't know the answer to, I would have the answer at my hip, because John West always knew.
Interesting story. Yeah, he was very pleasant guy. I didn't, have a chance to feed ho-hos to cats, but with him, just talking. The one day I had a chance to talk to him at a conference and doing a show with him. We had a lot of fun.
Yeah, he was a great
guy. And I think what was it? You just said something about continued a discussion about the lotus, and which reminded me that you do cover the zodiacal ceiling at the Temple of Hathor, and you go into the Tree of Life image that shows up, and then you go into a little segue into, it's basically like Jacob's ladder.
Right.
So if we're on this go on this tour with you next year, or we're just reading in your book, or listening along with the show tonight, what's the importance of this Tree of Life imagery?
Okay. Well, a couple of things. First of all, the ladder to heaven, which we ascend as in accordance with the pyramid text that's in the Old Kingdom, in the Pyramid of Unas, it discusses the ladder that is raised up to heaven, that is held on one side by Horus, the son of Osiris, and on the other side by Set. And these are like 2 opposing factions. But what's interesting about this is that you could think of something as positive and negative poles, but you have to have both sides holding the rung before you can go up it. Because if there's only one side, then there's no way to ascend. So balance, obviously, is the whole the middle path, or the middle pillar, what we call the middle pillar of the tree of life, is the way to ascend to heaven. It's the way spirit moves. And so that's actually a demonstration of the law of polarity that the Egyptians were really good with understanding. Polarity is not yes-no necessarily. It's like two variant aspects of one quality. It's like hot and cold are both qualities of temperature, and you don't want too hot or too cold. You want up the middle, right? So that's one of the things that you learn when you're looking at the fight between Horus and Set for who rules the land. Okay. And the truth of the matter is that both of them, there has to be a compromise for them. And that's the way the myth turns out, is that there's a compromise between Horus and Set. Now, the latter actually becomes the body of Osiris. It begins to look like you've seen that image of the Jed pillar. And the Jed pillar, they call it the backbone of Osiris. And it's divided into 4 layers. And the backbone of Osiris, you could think of it like the chakra system in a way. The lower part is the physicality. Then there's another plane that's the astral plane or the emotional plane. That's kind of like linked to the gut area. Then there's the mental plane, which is linked to the heart area, and then there's the spiritual plane that would be kind of linked to your crown chakra, sort of. So you could think of the body of Osiris as having these components, and inside the body of Osiris are these 9 spiritual bodies that are all inside his body. So that's the tree of life. And the Kabbalists were pretty much understood it one way, but, I was able to place these sacred bodies in alignment and began to understand how they worked together. So it's kind of something that I came up with, but that I believe everyone I've told it to sees that it's inherent in it. Now the ladder of heaven in the pyramid text is, it's the Ba flies up the ladder of heaven to go and commune with the ancestors, to receive the information about what the spiritual plan is, what the Akashic records say the spiritual plan is. And then the Ba soul flies back down the ladder and comes out, re-inhabits the body, and then the Pharaoh's Ba re-inhabits him, and then he enacts the wisdom that he has learned while he has ascended this ladder in his trance shamanic flight. So it's a very interesting text, and it doesn't quite appear the same way in the Old Kingdom, but it does in the New Kingdom as it does in the Old Kingdom. So
okay. So it's just cultural changes over time.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think there was a deeper shamanic culture in the Old Kingdom than there was in the New Kingdom. Though I could be wrong about that. There's some really interesting shamanic stories about Ramses the Great's son, who was a shaman. So.
Okay. I don't know. We're unfortunately approaching only like 20 minutes left in the show, but
Are my thoughts
wanted to.
wandering, Mark? Are my thoughts wandering too much? It's getting late.
No, it's just fascinating. It's unfortunately we only have 20 minutes or so. I'm just having a great time. Just wanted to make it interesting. Try to tie in an interesting point that kind of becomes a theme throughout your book. Is at the start of the show, you're talking a little bit about the spirit of the hieroglyphs, how much more emphasis was placed on the culture. Like they really valued the language, in use of the language, and also draw our attention to here, back to the book of John again in the fourth chapter. He just spoke about God as spirit, as well as at the start of the book of John, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God. So it's basically almost like the early on in the New Testament. It's just really another concept being carried on from ancient Egypt.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about, there's two gods that create out of desire. Ptah creates out of his desire by speaking it into being. Because he's mummified, he has no hands to make anything with. But he has this blue globe on top of his head, which is, and it's filled with, it's lapis lazuli, and it has these gold flakes in it. And it's like kind of the starlight in the deep blue sky, and the way you imagine the synapses between your brains sparking, And so you can see this in the God's image. And his hieroglyph is written with a pair of lips speaking, and light is springing from his lips. And I always thought it was fun that his name, Ptah, P-T-H, is kind of like Patui, because it's like he spits out light, and that's what creates the world. Now, that appears in John, but in Genesis, we have the image of God making humanity out of clay, making life out of clay. And that story of Yahweh is very similar to the story of a god named Khnum, who's a ram-headed god, and he shapes people on his potter's wheel out of clay. And the interesting thing about that is that on the island of Elephantine, when you go and you tour it, you can see where Khnum's temple was on this island. And it's entirely, built layer upon layer upon layer of mud when the flood came down and it hit this cataract. And so it would build up over thousands of years, these layers of mud. Well, there was also on the other side of the island a temple that the Jewish people had to Yahweh, who built his people out of clay. So on this one island, you have two of the same stories, And Yahweh has a consort the same way that Khnum has, named the Shekinah. And so you can see that there's this place there. When you're walking on the island, it's really fun. You can walk up like you're walking through the layers of time, and you look back down, and you can see this little town that's like got the houses where the Jews live, and you can see where there's like a bakery down there. You can see the ovens and stuff. And it's really quite fascinating to think that these two cultures live side by side, and they tell a similar story of creation, both of them. And there were other creator gods. There was a goddess who was a goddess of creation named Neith, and she, her dress was a net, and she pushed her net into the sea, and she pulled up, all the things of the world and the sea and the oceans and the air, and that's how she made the world. And she becomes related, actually, to Athena in the Greek culture. So, yeah, okay. And Thoth is the mathematician. He creates the world in a cauldron of snakes and frogs, and he stirs this cauldron up, and he looks in it, and he has this little chant that he says, first I was 1, then I was 2, then I was 4, then I was 8, then I was 1 again. And it sounds like he's seeing cells dividing, First I was 1, then I was 2, then I was 4, then I was 8, then I was 1 again. It's very interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're approaching about 10 minutes left. And I want, there are just so many different topics that, we can continue to get into. Hopefully, it didn't scare you off, and we can get into your scribe's book in the new year before you go on your trip, and then you'll be back with Barbara. But is there anything that you want to cover from your book, and just comment on it? Something that we didn't get to, or I overlooked.
Let's see. Yeah, that there are a deck of cards that go with the book, the Hieroglyphic Words of Power. If you would like the deck of cards, they're photographs. They can be found at the Goddess Inside must-have books. You can go on my website, or you can go on the Goddess Inside, which is Osset Roan's website, and you can order the cards, the deck of cards. Now, in the book, I also have various layouts to use that are based on the Egyptian, kind of Egyptian imagery, like the boat of Ra is called the Great Ennead, and it's 9 different cards that you use for a layout. There's the Zodiac of Dendera that you can use for a layout. There's the Tree of Life, like the Jed Pillar, you can use as a layout. And then there's the Ogdoad, which are the 8 cards, with Thoth. So anyway, it's all explained in the book how to use the deck for readings as well.
Okay. And I should give your website
one more time.
But yeah,
okay.
both your websites again.
Okay, it's NormandyEllis.com. The travel company is TwoLadiesTravelCo.com. And then Osset Roan's website is thegoddessinside.com.
Okay. Sounds great. If people were considering going on your trip, is it how's the food? Is it safe? Is there any?
Oh yeah. We every trip that I take, I have a private dahabeah, which is like a little sailing yacht. It only has about 16 people on it, which is our group. So you're not, with groups of people that you don't know, and you might get sick from or something. We have a private chef. He's usually a really great cook. Most often, you can get just about anything you want. We make sure that if somebody has food allergies, that we know in advance, and we tell the chef, don't make this, make this instead. Sometimes we even bring special food. We bring a medical kit. Everywhere we go, we have a medical kit. So if somebody takes a spill, we've got something to wrap their ankle in or whatever. And really, Egypt is a good place to travel in. The folks are fairly friendly. It's easy to find a pharmacy if you need one. It's easy to find a bank if you need one. I always tell people to change their money at the airport and then, in Luxor before they go home. So that's, yeah.
Okay, and people would need to get a passport?
Oh, yes, definitely.
Okay.
But you can buy your visa there. You don't need to buy your visa before you go. But you do need a current passport. And I believe at this time they are requiring that we have COVID tests that are taken within the 48 hours before we arrive at the airport. So that's good. That means they're being proactive.
Okay. Still have a few more minutes left. A lot of people are familiar with the title, the Egyptian Book of the Dead. What is it?
What is it? I know.
Yeah. What are the contents?
Oh, that's a whole other show. But in brief, I will tell you that the Book of the Dead is not what they call it. The ancient Egyptians called it the Book of Coming into Light. And so it's really a manual of seeking higher consciousness. It's just they called it the Book of the Dead because we found it under the arms of dead people and written and put in their coffins. But it actually is called the Book of Coming into Light. Totally gives you a different spin on what's inside it. It's best read while you're alive so that you're not having any surprises when you enter into the extraterrestrial life.
Okay. You do mention the emerald tablets, and that topic does come up from time to time in the discussions. Are those tablets on display somewhere? Is it just like something out of
not.
legend? They've been documented as Socrates actually saw them.
No, well, yes and no. The story is that they were handed down. They were handed down from the Atlantis to the Egyptians. That the Greeks had them at one time, but that they were lost and destroyed in the Library of Alexandria's destruction. Now, lo and behold, sometime during the Middle Ages, I think it was Ficino, I think is his name, maybe, I don't know. But sometime during the Middle Ages, one of those fellas from the Medici family showed up with what he said was an emerald tablet, and that was the one that was translated. So basically, it is either a copy of the real thing or it is an alchemical text.
Okay. I just wanted.
Yeah, but either way, it's got some great wisdom in it.
Okay, I'm just jotting that down. No, it's just one of those topics that researchers mention from time to time, and
right. And a lot of us will say that it's an actual thing, and we'll talk about it as if it's an actual thing. But if your question was, can we see a copy of it? The answer is no.
Okay. Well, I just I understand where you're going. And as we're winding down time, we should have done a 3-hour show. But what do you think of the like that? That's why we're having you come back more.
Yeah, great.
But
that's good.
We're surprisingly getting through this show with a lot of ease on Friday the 13th. So maybe we broke the jinx.
I think so. We had all the terrible stuff happen on Tuesday.
Yeah, so we're just just moving forward with a more optimistic view as we talk about ancient Egypt. But in the last 90 seconds or so, what do you think about the supposed library under the Sphinx's paw?
Well, I don't know if there's a library there, but I have seen things under the Sphinx's paw. I had a friend who actually went down that hole with a camera and took pictures of it with John West and Boris Said, who is they're both dead now, but Ray is still around. And he showed me photographs of what he took down there, and there was a sonogram that showed that there were rooms beneath rooms beneath rooms, 3 rooms under each other. But one of the rooms had water in it, and so they couldn't really figure out what was in the lower chamber because if they drilled down there, the water would flood it. But there was no water in it. So it's kind of interesting.
Okay. So we're going to have to stop there. We're just about out of time. Check out more about Normandy Ellis at normandyellis.com. Thank you so much, everyone, and we will see you Monday and Tuesday of next week. Have a great weekend. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mark. Thank you.